Right, okay. So basically, when you look at this particular unit, what OTHm has done is basically combined two units into one. Rather, and as we progress along in this unit, what we'll see is that there are three relevant concepts which have been included in this unit. Now, one of the first things first is the whole idea of doing this unit is it is to give you some idea of, because it's a master's level qualification. So what they want to do is give you the key aspects and theoretical frameworks about management. And in management, what we want to look at is specifically strategic management. That's the main part of this content, or content of this unit. The second part that they've included in this unit is something to do with marketing. So the learning outcome 1 talks about mostly strategic management as an approach. Why is it important? Why do you look at it? And how is it worked out, when we look at travel and tourism industry in particular. Now, in the second learning outcome, what they've done is they've mixed that particular, you've kind of not mixed, but maybe taken that forward and developed it into something called strategic marketing. Now, the idea of studying strategic management and also understanding strategic marketing is to look at how do you develop or basically develop and kind of create business plan. How do you look at forecasting, and how do you use some of the marketing models to be able to generate business or write documents which are vision documents, long-term business plan documents. So that is learning outcome 2. In learning outcome 3, what they've done is they've done a 360, and here they've included the technological aspect. So normally e-tourism or technology in tourism is normally a separate unit. But what they've done in this particular unit itself is in the learning outcome 3, they have included technology and the impact of technology on tourism. So, and in the 4th learning outcome, which normally needs to be a part of the research, for example, how do you undertake marketing research? Why do you do marketing research? What are the issues which are generally faced by, people who work and obviously, work the tourism and hospitality sector? That is basically, covered in learning outcome 4. So really, this particular unit has a lot of grounds, it requires a lot of ground to be covered. And that ground can only be covered if you have some background and understanding about, these 4 key areas. One is strategic management. So basically looking at the management approach. Then you look at strategic marketing, which is talking about, the key concepts of marketing frameworks, which help you analyze internal and external factors which affect the business in this sector in particular. And then we look at underpinning that understanding through various models. You look at BCG matrix, ANSOF matrix, value chain analysis, SWOT analysis, pestle analysis. So those are things that we need to be aware of. In the 3rd learning outcome, it talks about technology. So what are the issues which this sector is facing, how technology and what role technology has been playing in this sector for the last couple of years. And with the advent of technology coming in, what are the key advantages the sector has gained, and how this is now helping the sector to become much more efficient and much more productive. And it is also kind of eliminating a lot of intermediaries. Plus, it has given rise to a lot of new business models, which means that a new or different type of intermediaries have come on, which is the OTAs, the online travel agencies. And the last bit will be research. So we start off. What I want to do is, if I ask you to look at, starting off learning outcome 2, what we need to do is basically look at understanding now in terms of building some understanding on how do we look at getting an understanding on strategic marketing first. Is that okay? So in learning outcome 2 in particular, I've got 2 presentations which I want to show. And these 2 presentations are slightly different because one of them will give you a bit of a background on what is strategic marketing, and the other one will actually talk about the frameworks and models that we want to look at, in particular with related to travel and tourism industry. So what I'm going to do is now open them side by side, and what you have on your Moodle as of now uploaded is the one which basically talks about just the strategic marketing aspect, rather than the management. Okay. Now you should be able to see my screen. So what I've done is this presentation that you see on this side is actually on Moodle. And the other one, which is mostly background and the theoretical concepts that you need to understand, is on the left hand side. So this one I'm going to email to you, which basically talks about how basically talks about, you know, what is strategy, what is marketing, and why this function has come into travel, tourism, and hospitality industry, and why is it important, and how is it evolved, you know, over the years. So this is more of a generic reading, because this to give you background and concept about strategic management and strategic marketing as a whole in terms of the topic. Now, what I want to do is basically today in coverage of the learning outcome 2, we need to go through this particular presentation, which is primarily, you know, the concept of strategic marketing in hospitality and tourism industry. So let's go through this first, and then in between, when we have to jump into concepts and give you some background, I'm going to refer to some of the slides, you know, on the left hand side. In your case, probably it'll be the right hand side of your screen, and that would basically help us, you know, refresh some of the key concepts. Now, when we look at, you know, basics of definitions, you know, there are lots of definitions of marketing, but you know, it is one of the most important functions that we see, which helps drive, you know, sales and helps drive the demand for any products and services which a business might produce. So in the case of, you know, travel and tourism, the key demand which the business generates is that it needs to generate the demand, you know, for tourism. It needs to generate the demand for people to be able to travel and seek out leisure activities. So in general, when we look at, you know, the marketing activities which the you know, which this particular sector does, their activities are normally characterized to sell, say, the empty rooms in a hotel. If I look at it this way, they look at attracting or building loyalty base with customers, which could come across to the resorts time and again, you know, on special occasions. And they also want to build, you know, lineage with customers to be able to provide them, you know, the services which are meeting the expectation, meeting their expectation. And that essentially means that they provide quality service which customers enjoy, and that keeps them bringing back to, you know, the what do you call, the hotel or the resort, or, you know, whatever services they are availing. Now, just to give a snapshot why as a function marketing is important, or strategic marketing, and when we add the word strategic to marketing, is that this is used to create long-term and sustainable demand in this industry. So when I say marketing, I might do tactical marketing, I might do, you know, promotion-based marketing, and these concepts is what we'll study in the next slides that we go through. But the idea is, sometimes if you look at a small business, which could be a restaurant or a takeaway, what they tend to do is their activity in terms of promotion increases towards the weekend, because they know customers are going to be at home. And sometimes when they do leaflet drops or they do promotions, they normally target most of the you know, catchment area primarily on the weekend. So Friday there'll be a leaflet drop, or, you know, some text messaging and things like that, because they know there's an immediate business which can come on Friday evening, Saturday evening, or, you know, Sunday morning, or things like that. Now, the moment we add strategic to this particular concept, it means that this is going to be done on a sustained basis. This is something which needs to generate business for a long term. And this is something in which the company will be pouring in a lot of money from time to time, so that it keeps the demand fresh and also looks at increasing the revenues which the company can gain from the customers, maybe in the catchment area, whatever. So the same example, if I have to say, instead of tactical, if the restaurant or a local takeaway within the area that you live does this promotion for 3 months and then moves on to text messaging, and then does that for a couple of months, and then moves on to maybe some other sort of promotion, which could be that, you know, in certain occasions or certain days, they have special menus and, you know, special dishes, or, you know, or occasions like, for example, we had the Chinese New Year starting day before yesterday. So they did a special, you know, kind of a promotion on that. And because this is becoming like a calendar in which the small business is doing these activities time and again, this then assumes the, you know, the shape of something called strategic marketing. And what they're trying to do is use this as a tool to differentiate their services from what the other restaurants or other types of businesses are providing in that area. Is that okay?
Yep.
Now,
Great.
just a snapshot of travel industry. Travel industry currently is looking at moving up to about 1.3 billion customers or travelers by 2020. It is going to be one of the biggest industries, which gets revenues up to $2 trillion by 2020. And there are certain destinations that I could also add here, which have seen explosive in the nature of tourism or people coming to these destinations, and these include cities. There are loads of them, to be honest, and I put they include cities like Dubai, Singapore. They include cities like Cancun, which is in Mexico. You also look at cities like Florida. You look at cities. Rita. You look at cities in Europe. When you look at Spain, most of the destinations like Ibiza. You look at Maldives. You look at Mauritius. These places, Madagascar. If you look at, there are lots of cities in Madagascar. I don't know the exact coastal towns, but when you look at a lot of these places, they are entirely dependent on tourism. You look at Bali. So these destinations have become or have seen explosive growth happening in the last 30 years because it has become possible for customers now to travel frequently. There are lots of other things that we will talk about in terms of technology and other bits which have made this possible. Now, going further, what we look at is in this particular industry, this industry orients or basically looks at segmenting customers. Now, the segmentation of customers can be done because you have to tailor services to meet the demands of the type of customers who are coming to your, resort or hotel or the sector in general. Now, the purpose of business is to basically look at having that tailored service provided, which creates delight and experience, which again brings the traveler back to the same destination. So here, most businesses within the THM, tourism hospitality management sector, they look at placing customers' requirement first. Most industries look at it this way: the customer is the center of your universe. That means you look at making products which the customers will buy. But at some point in time, some of the industries look at other objectives, but here the central core objective remains the same, that they look at customers at the center of the universe, because the experience which has to be created is consumed at the end of the day by visitors or customers who come to avail those services. And that is why most of the reward system, when we look at employees, when we look at even customers coming in and buying those services again and again, are actually related to or directly related to the experience which the customers get. Now, there's a prominent study which has happened, and a lot of these studies which happen within this sector, there'll be one or two handouts that we will send you to read, will basically clearly say that over the years, as the sector has expanded, what has happened is a lot of the expansion is now funded through the franchisee system. So when you look at hotel chains, when you look at resorts, when you look at, say, for example, other facilities which are provided within the sector, this has given rise to something called a franchise system. And what Michael Levin, who's the CEO of an organization in the US, it basically says that it's very important for business to have a customer orientation approach. That means any franchise which is opened within this particular sector needs to know where their customers will come from, what services the customers need, how these services will be provided, and at what price they will be provided. And that is where the whole concept of customer orientation becomes very important. Now, marketing, we've looked at one. There's another one. Which organizations in this sector engage with individuals or group to be able to obtain their services. So when you look at a lot of hotel chains, they go through travel agents, they might go through online agencies, they might go through referrals, their own loyalty schemes. And the whole idea behind the going out or outreach is primarily to look at marketing the unspent capacity of rooms in the hotel. So here, the concept of marketing primarily revolves around the fact that they keep on promoting the service, which helps bring individual groups to the destination for availing those services. Now, a person working within this field who understands how capacity planning can be done, how implementation of events, promotional activities can be done, and those activities which are then controlled because of the fact that you have finite budgets, and these controlled activities then result in the basically result in the consumers. Say, for example, in this case, if I look at a hotel, these controlled activities look at increasing bookings of rooms within that hotel. Is the role of, is primarily the function and the role of marketing department and the people working within the department. So in particular, the marketing manager. Now, in order to understand what different types of marketing happens within this sector, what we need to look at is step back and generically look at what are the core marketing concepts. Now, there are different concepts. So we will look at one of the concepts which is primarily based on need, wants, and demand. That means, sometimes when you plan a business or you make a business plan, you make it on the basis of a very basic thing, that there is demand for a particular type of service, and you are directly providing, supply to cater to that demand. So here, the need would be that when we look at, say, for example, tourism within a country, a lot of destinations which kind of come up in the tourism radar might be because they have natural, let's say, natural affinity to be able to provide tourism. So when you look at Malé, for example, or you look at Maldives, for example, or if you look at, say, because it's an island, typically when you look at that characteristic, what will happen is that people who live on that island might not, might basically look at giving that, okay, if we have tourism, then it'll help us to, basically cater to a demand which is in the periphery or from the nearby countries. And in return, what they get is some services or money coming into the economy. And that would basically mean that, this concept looks at, if there is a need, then there is a business. If there is no need, there is no business. Sometimes you will see that people living on the same island might not want to go on vacations within the same island. They might want to go across to a different country because they see water all around. So what their demand is primarily, if they take vacation, they travel abroad. They don't stay in the country. So if there is a need, there is a demand. That's the first concept. The second concept is product. Now, when we look at product basically is, the concept is based on the fact that there are companies which offer a lot of services, but what they do is they create specific products and services which meet or cater to a demand from a target segment. So here an example would be that when you look at, say, tourism in Maldives or Malé, and when over a point in time you see customers coming across and they ask for more amenities or more facilities or premium facilities, then in that case, at some stage after the research has been done, the hotel chains or maybe the existing providers, after doing a bit of research, have decided that we need to be able to up and provide services which are premium. So they might have introduced, initially it started off in resorts which were offering basic services, but then there were services which are now being offered, or products which are being offered now which are maybe more premium, and they bring in more revenue for the hotel. So here the product is very specific. So for example, some of the destinations that we go to, or you would have traveled to, normally are kind of listed as, okay, these destinations are party destinations, these destinations are for honeymooners, these destinations are family destinations, wherein the family can go and have a holiday. So over a point in time, the products have been created which cater to a particular segment, and that is why the concept then turns around and it is called the product concept. Now, in the whole, when we look at, there are three things which are very consistent, which are being provided. One is customer value. Now, if you see, you want to buy, say, for example, you want to buy a mobile phone. Now, when you want to buy a mobile phone, you basically go in, you look at the product, and what you do is you evaluate the features and the benefits. And then at some stage, you relate it to maybe the price of the product. You also relate it to how good the quality is or the build of the phone is. And then at some stage, you also compare it to some other products. Like, for example, if you're buying a Samsung phone, You might want to, you like the product. When you go into the store, you try and compare it with maybe the iPhone. And here is where you look at key differences like, okay, does the phone have, has this feature? Does it have that feature? Once you've done the comparison, you then look at, okay, this phone is costing me, say, $700. This is costing me $800. And then overall, you look at how the build and the quality of the phone is and which is what you want to go with. So in the product concept, these three characteristics are very important. That the product needs to give value to the customer. That means it should be clearly differentiable. That means it should have benefits or features which the customers can clearly identify. The second is it should be able to meet all the customer expectations. So for example, if you were looking at having Bluetooth or better Wi-Fi signal or higher memory capacity or a better camera, then in that case, all these things have to be in that product for it to be able to sell and create demand. And the third is when you look at these features, you look at doing a bit of comparison. What you try and do then is compare apple to apple, and you say, okay, this product is priced this much, this product is priced this much, but the quality and the build and what I get in terms of manufacturer's warranty is maybe a bit superior. I get some additional packages or details, and those are the three parameters which need to be looked at in the product concept. Now, the product concept works on basically three areas. One is you might want to trade in your old phone and in exchange get a new one, correct? It could be the other way would be that, okay, in some cases what you try and do is you if you're buying some good services, like if you're going across on a small or a quick getaway or a holiday, what you then tend to do is sometimes you look at the value of the transaction. You look at okay, if I'm going to buy this phone, then if I buy it on installments or if I buy it on a payment plan wherein the airtime is included and I keep paying it over a point in time, I think I should be able to manage. But when you look at buying it upfront, you might feel that the transaction value or the value at which the phone needs to be bought in the initial values might seem to be too high. So then what you look at is options to buy through the route of a consumer agreement or a finance agreement. And the last is some of these products that you buy, which help you in leisure or travel, essentially within this sector, it's more of you building some emotional touch or contact with the destination, and that is where these hotels and some of these chains basically look at creating an emotional or a networking touch, which then tends to create a relationship. That if you've had a good experience with a destination, then that would mean that you have some positive recall, and if asked about this destination, your experience, you will have some good things to talk about it from that aspect. The second concept that we look at is market concept. Now, in the market concept, what happens is a lot of sellers are selling their products, and a lot of buyers are buying the products in the market. So here, the market is basically consisting of actual buyers and sellers who will transact and exchange, or in return you will buy the products and services. Now, when we look at some of these concepts, the reason is there are three in general when we look at market concept, selling concept, production concept, and the basic need and demand concept. Now, when we look at these concepts are important because you need to understand from a perspective of travel and tourism industry, which concept will work in which situation. Now, the production concept is if there is demand for goods in the market, then the producer will basically look at, producing goods which at some stage will be, sold to the consumers. So we are going to understand this very quickly. Manufacturing concept, here what they do is the manufacturers kind of favor consumers, that they have lots of people who want to buy their products. The products are highly affordable, and the manufacturer will essentially produce it in, great volumes. So when you look at some of the FMCG companies, or when you look at, the hotel companies setting up a hotel with 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 rooms in certain locations, like when you look at Las Vegas, when you look at, large destinations like Singapore, wherein the room capacity in a particular city might be 3, 4, 5,000 rooms. They know that this is a destination which people will come in and, stay. And that is why they keep building up the capacity, because they know it is this location is popular, it's favorable, and there is enough demand in the market, so customers will basically come in and stay in this location. Now, product concept talks about, I've just covered, product concept talks about looking at preferences of customers first. what they want, how much they want, how they want, and that is where the product then goes into. So when you look at some of these companies, which I gave you an example of, like iPhone and Samsung Galaxy S8 or whatever new phones, they do a lot of research and invest billions of dollars or done some research. Okay. So the key difference product concept is they look at customers first. In the manufacturing, they know that the customers are buying, it's a run-of-the-mill product, and the manufacturers keep producing because they know that this is something which has a pent-up demand. So if, for example, if you look at soap bars that we use in hotels, right? Or we look at the basic, things that you use on a day in, day out basis, you clearly know that there's a demand for these products like a toothpaste and other things. So manufacturers, have to have inventory, and they keep manufacturing it because they know it keeps selling. But in the case of product, if, say, for example, somebody is to bring out a unique product which does not have demand in the market, then that product would bomb. So if you look at Apple products in the last few years, or in this case, from the time they've introduced the iPhone, the Apple Watch has not created significant traction. Though they did a bit of research to understand what the customer's requirements and demands are, but this product has not created the same kind of traction which they would have expected from the phone and the iPad, right? So here, the product concept is key because they need to create the product which meets the demand of customers. Now, the selling concepts look at that consumers will not buy enough products until the company undertakes large selling and promotional efforts. So here, the focus is on selling it to the customer, hard sell. Sometimes you see that in certain seasons, say in certain months or weeks throughout the year, your sales will go down in resorts or in towns which are purely dependent on tourism. And what they tend to do in those months or weeks would be to aggressively advertise to get customers in, right?
Yeah, right.
Now you know that a lot of customers actually travel during summer vacations. They take vacations abroad, but in order to run the resorts and the hotels and all this industry, keep it going for 12 months long, what some of these guys will do is, when they know that there is demand, we don't need to advertise, we don't need to do it because it is something which customers will do. But in certain months wherein it is deemed as that these months are not favorable for vacation, what tends to happen is a lot of promotion and advertisement goes in to basically build demand or get demand from customers. Correct? So here the companies have to do promotions or have to offer discounts to be able to get customers in to kind of avail those say, for example, packages or holidays. The market concept looks at organizational goals. So this concept is slightly different because it looks at understanding the market, and then when you understand the market, you go and understand the need, wants, and demand concept. And with that, what they do is you introduce products, but before you introduce this, you also understand competition in the market, how strong it is, whether you will be able to come in and survive, whether you will be able to come in and create a foothold. And in this case, sometimes the market concept looks at mergers and acquisition. So if this is a destination becoming popular, Hilton wants to set up a resort and they do not get permission, they can take a lot of time with the governmental process to get policies and procedures in place, get the land, start building it. By the time market would move or the demand would change. So what they look at in that case is they come in and they basically acquire an existing business or create a joint venture, which then helps them get into the market quickly, to understand the market and also the basics of the market. So here they would come in and buy a brand or do a joint venture with a brand which has good reputation, has good experience or provides good experience to its customers, and then finally it basically also has the capability to kind of grow the business. Okay, is that something which is understood?
Yes.
Yeah. So here you might see some hotel chains coming into destinations like Mauritius, Maldives, Singapore, but because it's very competitive now to get into these markets, they still want to have a foothold there. What they will do is they will study the market, look at acquiring a business, but they will come in and open a business in that segment which will have less competition competition, or when they introduce something, their product is going to be more superior than what is already being offered in the market. And that is why they look at market concept. Now, these concepts, start with some of these concepts are very, grouped broadly into selling and marketing. Selling concept starts with factory. That means you keep producing and the product is run of the mill and it is required. In marketing concept, they start with customers' need. They look at the market, they look at basically the demand, what type of customer preferences or, basic things are there. And that's the key difference between these two concepts. Now, there is something called a societal marketing concept, which has also originated in the last few years. Now, here, the need, wants, and demand model, or that concept, is basically societal concept. So here, what we look at is the organization before coming into the market with a product or services, looks at identifying clearly the needs, the wants, and what are the key requirements of the market. So an example here would be when you look at Disney. Just to give you an example. Now, Disneyland as a franchise, as a business, there are only, I think, about 5 or 6 Disneyland or Disney Worlds in the, outside the US. There are only 5 or 6 such franchises. I think one is in the Middle East, one is in Paris. They've opened one in China, and I think there is one towards either Hong Kong or Japan. I'm not too sure, but yeah. So when you look at this, what they've done is this is a very premium brand. So the organization, what they've done is they know that they do not want to dilute their brand or reduce prices or increase, because there is no competition to them, Disneyland, the way they have created. So because there is no competition, what they want to do is they want to strategically open a business or a model franchise basically in a place wherein they will be able to draw in business for years and years to come. And what they do is, before this is done, they clearly identify the needs, the wants, and why customers want to come to Disney World. So they have a lot of loyalty data or data which is applicable, collected over the years, and they put this data to test in terms of making sure that they identify the reasons of opening a franchise or that business in a particular location. Now, in the last few years, they've opened one in China, in I think Shanghai or Beijing. I think the reason why they've opened this is because they see that the burgeoning, the increasing middle class, it has a lot of money and there is a big demand for this product. So what they've done is they've not opened it in the last 10 years or so, but when they opened it from an aspect of looking at the best location, the best city, wherein the affordability and the income levels are there for this product to prosper. And here they have, because that as a product has very little competition, what they have been able to do is, by coming into that city, opening that has also kind of benefited the society. Sometimes you see the governments would invite business or, ask certain businesses to come and open up franchise or, large scale operations in a particular location, is because the government, they work with the government in synergy to try and come in and create jobs, create a good look and feel factor that this is something which was really needed, and that is why they've done. So they look at it from a benefit not just to them but also to the to a certain extent the society. Now, after understanding these concepts, what we need to know is that why there is why marketing is required in this particular sector. Now, when you look at sustained growth, the term sustained, when you look at long-term planning, essentially for long-term planning, to bring predictability into the business, to look at forecasting that there is going to be a business for, this particular hotel or this particular resort or, in general, this sector in that location, they have to look at doing a lot of market research. They have to understand the concepts of marketing. And when they understand these concepts of marketing, this is then applied reverse to understand why this will be a good location. You answer the 7, or the 5 W's: what, when, where, why. And these are basically the key starting points of understanding why strategic marketing is important to the tourism and hospitality sector. Now, the other thing that you look at in this sector, anything which comes in contact with this sector, things change quite rapidly, right? If you look at technology, and this is something I will discuss in the next presentation, but technology, when you see, it changes very quickly and it changes the requirements within this sector quite quickly. Now, if you look at when I say quickly means, every decade, if we just put it as a benchmark, that every decade the increase in or the enhancement in technology is making this sector more and more open, more and more people are able to travel. So let's look at the key developments which have happened in this sector. The first thing that we look at is, when we look at this sector, you look at when the ticketing and booking software came in, the hotel management softwares which allowed booking and ticketing electronically. So Abacus and some of the other softwares, when it came in the 1980s, before that, all the rooms and allocation and bookings were done on a manual basis. But when that came in, it was quickly ramped up. Most hotel chains, most places adopted that system because it allowed them to get an inventory of the hotel in terms of rooms, spare rooms at an instant at any given point in time. With that coming in, it led to distribution being made available through intermediaries, the travel agents, the tour operators, and that became a big business. Because what they could do is they could come in, block, inventory, or maybe come in, say, okay, we need these many rooms, and they used to then sell those rooms and, create demand. And the hotel chains and the people working in this industry were happy that as long as their rooms were sold, they weren't too bothered or fussed about at what price it was being sold because there was less competition. But then you look at the 2000s, with the advent of internet, most of this game changed because, some of this came online. And when it came online, the customers had the ability to be able to, compare, look at dynamic pricing, also book and cancel, and some of the other features came in. So marketing and technology has played a very important role in the rapid development of tourism in the world. And this is seen, if we consider and look at the last 3 decades, you will see the airline sector has grown tremendously. You see the hotel sector has grown tremendously. You see the number of customers or people taking holidays has doubled almost every 10 years. And this sector then continues to embrace new ideas in marketing and technology to kind of make it much more efficient and much more competitive. So when we look at the role of strategic marketing in travel and tourism, we need to understand that why is it important, how is it applied, and in areas in which it is applied, it allows the company, the departments, the sector in general to become much more efficient, which means that with regard to time, quality, and money, there are savings happening on site. So there is reduction of time, there is increase of quality, and there is decrease in cost in certain cases. Depends on the product, but if you're looking at a 5-star, 7-star hotel, they might kind of price it in such a way that they get that demand, but they also make higher profits. So, but the quality provided at that level would be the most, would be the highest level of quality which would be provided because you're demanding premium for a certain service. So here, what we need to do now is to understand that it plays a very important role. We need to look at examples and models and frameworks to see how these are then used within the industry to come up to conclusions. So for example, if I have to understand, just to give you an example, say in Manchester, if you have to look at which is the best hotel. So when the comparison has to be done, we have to look at an appropriate model. So we might ask some of the hotel chains to do a SWOT analysis. Once they've done the SWOT, then we look at, doing some survey with the customers. And once we've done the survey with the customers, we look at overall service which the hotels provide, and then come to some realistic score of, why this hotel is ranked the best or, is basically favored by most customers coming to Manchester. And in that case, use a lot of frameworks. So we look at the BCG matrix or the Boston Consulting Group matrix to understand which hotel is at which phase of their life cycle in terms of product life cycle. If you look at the Gotham Hotel, for example, here, which is one of the oldest hotels, it has some vintage feel, it is quite premium, but a lot of modern day travelers might not want to go and stay in that hotel is because they feel it's quite old and it's kind of obsolete. They want to come in and stay in modern hotels like Hilton, or maybe they want to go into a skyrise building. And that is where the concept of marketing comes in, because they then help you identify with these frameworks that whereabouts is the business in the whole product life cycle, or the in the ecosystem within a particular location. Okay.
Correct.
Now, some of the best practices that we look at when we talk about, within this sector, we look at Four Seasons Hotels, which always has put customers first. You look at Singapore Airlines, which was one of the pioneers, and they have had the top ranked airline award for a number of years, before some of the other airlines like Emirates and Etihad and Qatar and some of the other airlines have started to kind of drive more marketing efforts to build reputation. Over a point in time, as the reputation has been built into something, product quality has also led them to have best airline award. Now, when you look at some of the cities, if I have to look at, so Dubai as a city, 30 years back, that city had nothing. But if you look at that city now, it is like a jewel in the crown within the Middle East. So this city rivals the likes of New York and Hong Kong because it has pretty much everything that you would expect to see, from skyscrapers, to desert safaris, to people, cultures, and everything. So this city has changed its image from being a smuggling capital of the world or the Arab world to being the tourist destination of EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And similarly, when you look at airports and different services, so I'm just giving across 4 different examples. So if you look at hotels, it's Four Seasons. If you look at the airlines, which is a major component of this industry, we had Singapore Airlines. If you look at cities, Dubai has changed its image. And when you look at, for example, the airport, it is basically the Hong Kong airport. But yes, in the last few years, the Delhi airport has been awarded the second best airport in Asia. When you look at the Seoul airport in Korea, Incheon, that's been awarded the best airport award a couple of times. So these things are now moving targets, and this is where you see the power of marketing or strategic marketing coming in, because this is not been achieved overnight, and this has happened with sustained effort of marketing in terms of sales, promotion, business development, networking, and this has then resulted into some of these type of destinations achieving or being the best destinations with regards to providing services and the experiences to customers. Okay. Now that helps us cover some of the the key bits on learning outcome 2. So what we have done is we have looked at the importance of strategic marketing in travel and tourism, which is 2.2, and then how we look at businesses using this with the examples of Disney, like I've given, and resorts that I've given, to understand why it is important to look at this as a process, and this is something which you cannot negate. Now, in the hotel industry, what typically do is, if you are in a good location, what tends to happen is that as long as you are getting the business and your rooms are always sold out, most hotel owners or resort owners would not invest into marketing. What they will do is they will do strategic marketing of building reputation. Right? They will not do tactical marketing. They will look at building reputation. For example, that would mean that they advertise in the airline magazines as a location to promote that location, and that is a consistent visibility that they have across the year, 12 months. So they choose very pinpoint methods of advertising because they are looking at building reputation, and they are looking at building the demand which comes through premium customers or from customers which basically use airlines or travel frequently. Now this is important because when we look at certain places which have or which basically are sold out and they get a lot of business, the demand actually exceeds the supply. Now in that case you will not see marketing happening, but in places wherein there is less demand but there's a lot of supply. So when you look at cities like Las Vegas, for example, when you look at cities now like Dubai as well, you look at cities like Phuket or Pattaya in Bangkok, and some of the other destinations like Bali, what you will see is here, because they have become popular destinations over the year, what has happened is that there's a lot of capacity for tourism in these locations. But if the marketing engine stops, that destination will also disappear from the map. right? So lot of people within this industry understand the importance of strategic marketing, because that city or that destination has come onto the map because of being a destination for travel and tourism or for leisure purposes. Now, if they stop doing the outreach or stop doing the promotions, what will happen is that destination will get left out and something else will take its place for a point in time. So here, the role of marketing as a function within this sector is quite important, because it helps drive demand, and it creates this demand which basically then provides what you call employment, and provides revenue to a lot of people, in terms of business capital and other things working within this sector. Is that okay?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Any questions on this so far?
So far, everything is clear.
Okay, great. Now let's look at running through a few slides. Now this is a presentation I'm going to send to you, which talks about the strategic management. This is something that you need to understand, which is task 2.1, because it talks about the evolution of marketing approach and why it is important within the tourism sector. So when we look at the basics, we start with differentiating three words: strategic, marketing, and then within that we look at just bifurcating the two words. Now, what is strategy? A strategy is a plan that integrates the main goals of the organization, and then it also kind of looks at all the resources which are available to achieve those goals, and with that you create a best go-to market, and that is what something will be called a strategy, right? So sometimes what happens is you have to sit an exam. So what your strategy is, you get to hear this question, okay, what is your strategy to crack the exam? So for example, if somebody is sitting a driver's exam or taking a driving test in a new location, what is your strategy for clearing the test? You get to hear these sentences, isn't it?
Yes.
So when you get to hear these sentences, what you see is that people are basically asking you, things that you're going to do, considering your strengths and weaknesses, and how would you achieve that? That is what they're basically asking you. So similarly, when you look at strategy from an organizational perspective, what they're looking at doing is you look at your you look at inwards, and you look at all the things that the company has, which could be various department, resources, people, and then what you do is you align them together to see what you can achieve with those resources and different type of resources when you set some objectives. And that would be basically a process that we will call, which is strategy. Now strategy can be short term, it could be long term. That means you have a short term objective and you have a long term objective. Now assuming if you're a manufacturing company and you want to produce 5 million, say, soap bars, right? What the first thing which the production manager will do is look at the inventory which is available to produce this or not for this month. Now, if he knows that we don't have enough inventory and by the time we order more, that will not come in time to create that volume, the manager would sit down with his colleagues internally and say that because we normally produce a soap bar which is, say, 100 gram in weight, and we have, if we look at that production concept, what we will be able to do is only produce 4 million as against a target of 5 million. So the other thing what they will do is they will sit down and kind of strategize and say, okay, if we reorder, we will not get this material in time. But then in order to meet that demand in the market, what they will have to do is they will sit down, and what do you think they will do? They will sit down and say, okay, we will produce an 80 gram soap bar, which will allow us to hit the target of 5 million. But the sales and marketing guys will come in and they'll say, okay, this cannot be priced at the same value. In that case, for that month, they might come up with the idea of saying, okay, we will do a specific promotion, which would kind of beat the competition, or, provide a slightly lower price and at a product which is commensurate to that price, but it will help grab market share from other smaller players in the market.
Yes, right.
This is how you look at the role of marketing, is because you can or shy away from it. You need to produce these, because if you do not produce and there's a gap in supply and demand, then you end up losing market share. So in order to not lose market share, what you will sometimes see is and this is reverse true as well. So sometimes you see a lot of these manufacturers when you buy FMCG products like dishwasher tablets or whatever you go and buy, sometimes you will see that they will try and upgrade you to a higher price by giving you some differential more. So instead of 50 tablets, you might get 70, but that will be 1.5 times the price, and customer sees a value in that. And that could be because they have a lot of raw material, which means overstocking, inventory costs, and other bits. So what they do is they decide to do a time-bound offer to say, okay, if you want to get some extra at a fraction of an extra price, what we do is we give you a slightly higher, quantity. And sometimes this is what you get to see in hotels happening as well. So if you're trying to book a holiday and the rooms, economy rooms are sold out, but you do not, and you want to move your demand now to fill up the other rooms like economy, premium, or premium rooms, what the people at the front desk will normally do is, okay, we run out of this room, but what I can do is I can discount the premium room by 20%. So effectively what you're doing is you're passing on an offer to a customer, and in that offer, what you're trying to do as a short-term strategy is to fill up the premium rooms which are not being sold by offering and enticing the customer. So there is short-term and long-term strategy, and this is primarily, the core of what we call the strategic management, wherein you have to look at resources, you have to look at your competition, and there are various models that we'll quickly go through in this slide to try and understand how this is developed, why it is important, what kind of things you look at to consider and create a strategy, and once you've done that, how do you implement the strategy? And that is all in the context of the strategic marketing approach, task of 2.1. Okay. So there is a historical concept to this that, some 30 years back, budgeting came across, and when budgeting came across, that meant that because resources, when we look at the 1940s and 50s, everything was in surplus, availability. There were lots of resources available because factories were not there. But as the industrialization happened, what tended to happen is that the scarcity of resources started to happen. Countries started to export and import resources from other places to be able to keep the production facilities going. And in the 90s, what we did see was that as a process, budgeting came into the organization, which meant that you are trying to allocate resources and then monitor the variations in terms of production. So if there was, say, an example here would be just sticking to the soap factory, that there was a X amount of raw material going to produce Y number of soap bars. If it was leading to wastage, that wastage was not being utilized and was costing the company. So budgeting as a principle meant that somebody in the organization could look at that resource wastage, calculate the cost, and basis the calculation of cost, put some corrective action plan in place or monitoring in place to investigate those variances or why this was happening. And this course correction would essentially lead to then companies saving money in the long run. So when you look at a lot of companies which basically produce goods today, and you see some goods, let's look at petroleum as in the industry, gas, oil and natural gas. Now, when you refine crude oil, there are lots of other byproducts which come out. But when you look at the early, 50s and 60s when oil was discovered, this was not something, the companies were more interested in, just producing gasoline or, petrol and diesel essentially. But over the years, as the resources become much scarce, and we know that this is going to run out, what tends to happen is they try and utilize every byproduct of the oil and gas as well. So in some cases, you will see that if there is a lot of gas also detected, what they do is they put a gas, pumping station there as well to be able to tap that. But when the refining of crude oil happens, there are lots of byproducts like naphtha, kerosene, and a lot of other byproducts are produced, which are also now sold in the market. And this has happened because the cost of production in terms of crude is increasing. And when we look at the cost being minimized, the process of budgeting has come in, and that has brought in some control mechanisms into the process for them to look at, every resource, because that resource is scarce and that might run out one day. So when we talk about strategy, there is long-term planning. And, when we look at long-term planning, essentially in the 70s and 80s, this came about because what it meant was, in order to bring predictability into the business, when you look at building a hotel, say you have a hotel which has 400 rooms. Now, you must have done some planning to see why you are building a 400-room hotel in that location, right? Now, if you've done that, that means there is some sort of planning which has gone in to see what will be the future demand, how long will the demand be, or how strong the demand will be. And this then has led to some sort of forecasting saying that if we build this hotel, then we need to build these many minimum rooms, because as the business increases, we will also have demand increasing for the number of rooms required in that location. And that has all meant that you have to do strategic planning. Now, when we look at understanding strategic management, what we basically understand is that anything that has to be put into practice, anything that we do has to have some logic, has to have some background research. Now, when I say that, just making this up right now in terms of statistics, but when I say that Las Vegas as a destination is expected to grow 10% in the years to come, I'd say 2025. Now, how do we know that it is going to grow that much? So, ways to find out the growth patterns for that location, and that would be basis studying past consumer trends. That means how many people visit, what time of the year they visit, studying all those details. Then they look at demographics. We then also look at, things like, for example, how many other competitors are coming to the market, how many other hotel chains are investing in this location, what kind of services people are demanding now, the advances in technology. Now, all these inputs and changes which are coming in are actually being put into some sort of a business paper or a strategic paper, which basically looks at tabulating all the things and then comes up with a document which says, okay, if I have to look at research, if I have to look at forecasting, and if I have to look at understand how this location will grow, what are the factors which will affect the business, is it going to increase, decrease, and what is it going to increase, how much investment is required. That particular document, which will have all these things into it, will be nothing but something called a vision document, or a document which captures data to kind of predict how the business will move in the next few years. Now, that document, which has all this data, is then transformed into something called, that data essentially is transformed into something called information. And that information, when it transformed into knowledge, that means, okay, we know now from background that so many million visitors visit Las Vegas, and this has been happening in terms of growth. The city has seen a growth on an average of so many percentage in the last 10 years. So because that has been analyzed, interpreted, and we have come to some conclusion, that becomes something called knowledge. And when that knowledge is used to produce a document for management, something which is concise, something which has data which is backed up by research, that document, when it is produced for the management, becomes a strategic document. And when the management renews it or reviews it to set goals and objectives for the organization, or decides on a line of action for the next few years for the organization, that particular process is called strategic management, right? Because they are going to be, the management is now going to be taking the staff and anybody who works within the organization or is directly or indirectly connected with the organization, of taking them on a journey. And that journey would look at basically transforming, changing the organization from point A to point B, or take the organization from point A to point B. But in that effect of that journey, that would mean that some of the basic services, some of the basic things, or the things that the organization uses to provide products and goods and services, would change over a period of time. And that process will be called strategic management. And the people who manage that process will be a part of management of the document, business strategy document. Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Now, some of the other slides, you have to go through, and these are slides just for your reference to develop some knowledge and understanding about strategic management as a topic or as an area.
Okay.
Now, what we want to study, in this is how both of them are linked, right?
Yes.
So when we look at strategic management and strategic marketing, we see, three different phases from where the strategic management as a document moves to becoming a strategic marketing document. That means it's put into action. So some of these things are kind of summarized on this particular slide. Now, once the document is ready, it sits outside somewhere here. And then once the document is ready, the marketing department picks it up and does further analysis on it to break it down into greater, aims and objectives. So they do environmental analysis to see, competitors, economic environment. They do internal analysis, which is through the basis of SWOT, look at their strengths, weaknesses, and then to a certain extent, they do market research to understand customers' requirement. This then is formulated into something called a formulating strategy document. That means they are further drilling it down and clearly outlining who they are going to target as customer, where the product is going to be positioned, what is the branding going to be. And if I give you an example here, so over the years, what has happened is Hilton Hotel, or some of the other hotels, when we look at hotel industry in general, they have now, there is a, star rating system which came in.
Yes.
Now, this star rating system, when it came in, it started to categorize these hotels into various stars. So if you had, say, for example, a 24-hour coffee shop and, 24-hour check-in and check-out, you probably had 1 star. But with the addition of coffee shop, if there was an addition of a restaurant and that restaurant maybe was, operational 24 hours, then it became 2 star. 3 star was when you had 24-hour electricity, running water, and, say, for example, laundry service going, it became 3 star. 4 star was that you had Michelin star restaurants and you had, for example, a certain number of facilities, which meant that the room size was this much, or, certain basic facilities like a cyber cafe or, the PC suite, office suite, those type of things. When it came in with the swimming pool, they kind of became 5 star, 4 star and 5 star. Now, 6 and 7 star was when the addition of suites happened and, some of the other features which happened in the industry. Now, when that happened, basically that meant that targeting, positioning, branding, and product development innovation was becoming quite clear. That means a hotel which did not have suites, did not have a swimming pool, could not target, getting premium customers. So the strategic document, after understanding their strengths, weaknesses in competitors, external and internal environment, gets into formulating a strategy that where do we want to go as a hotel from here to the next 10 years. So they might build up capacity, they might introduce suites, they might build a new swimming pool, create a, say a family area, have 1 or 2 restaurants, or they buy to try and achieve a Michelin star, things like that. And that is basically now putting some part of that strategy document into action. And the implementation of it is physical construction starts. Budgets are attributed, management approves that plan, and that basically gets into the implementation stage. Is that okay?
Yep.
Now, with the reference to this slide, what we do is we need to understand how do we do external analysis. And here we will study a number of tools to basically understand external, how is the external environmental analysis done, right? So here we look at these broad areas, and then once we have to do the external analysis, we look at tools like PEST, which is PESTEL in short, basically looking at all the factors which affect the business from external perspective, which we do not have control on. So political factors, economic factors, social, technological factors are external factors. They might not just affect you, but affect all the other hotels or all the other businesses in the travel and tourism sector. So if there was a recession in the economy, that meant it affected everybody, right? Yes. The numbers were down, the hotel capacity was down, it affected pretty much everybody. So these are external factors which are macro, that means external to the organization. So we've clubbed some of them together here. Then you do competitors analysis, and in that there are certain objectives that we look at of why do you do these competitor analysis. Again, when you understand these, the idea is sometimes you will see there's a bit of poaching which happens, that you hire employees from another hotel because you're getting already a trained manpower, or the person knows about the best practices of that hotel, and those kind of things definitely happen. So when you look at competitor capabilities, you look at these areas in general to identify that. Then we look at market analysis. And the market analysis looks at, studying the trends and, the direction in which the market is moving in the next couple of months and years. And that is where they, look at, again, this is external analysis. Now, once we've done that, we look at internal. That means what are the strengths of the organization? How do we look at growing internally and creating, some of these strength areas which were weaknesses or things like that, building our capacity or capabilities. Those are bits which are looked at in this side. Now, if you're expanding your hotel, that's fine from a strategic perspective, but that would mean that you would need to hire more manpower. You would need trained managers to be able to run that department effectively, right? So those are internal capacities that you look at building over a point in time. And once you've done that, at some stage, because the whole operation is becoming quite big, what tends to happen is you also look at building organizational competencies. That means you're trying to build in or build, features which will not have much competition, or in some cases, you'll have manpower who will be able to manage, or senior management or managers who will be able to manage this. So that is what you study within the internal side of things. There might be audits that you do to try and come to, a conclusion that why this is not the case. So sometimes when you look at now, environmental conservation, is a big challenge for hotels, correct?
Correct.
You have to look at recycling, you have to look at being self-sufficient, electricity production, things like that. So a lot of hotels now, because the compliance and guidance is being introduced by governments, what the hotels are being forced to do is basically look at renewable energy, because the hotel, or when you look at research, 40% of world's electricity produced is actually utilized within buildings, right? So a lot of stress is now being put in when we look at the effects of carbon, gases and things like that with the environmental heating, rise in temperatures and all that. What is happening now is the governments across the world are putting rules and regulation for this sector, which will mean that they will need to comply with stricter guidelines to meet them, so that they are able to, produce less waste. They use renewable methods of energy. They have a little bit of social responsibility, which is called CSR, corporate social responsibility. And these are things which the organization, kind of do an audit on, self-audit on. And there is marketing audits, different types of audits which is done. But these audits are done to kind of, understand your own capabilities so that you can benchmark yourself against competition. Is that okay? And then what we need to do is, there is another, bit which is to understand is that when you have all this background, how does a company put together a long-term strategic document? How do you put together a document which will define your growth plans for next 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Because in this area, you cannot, because there's billions of dollars and, money involved at very large capital or sums of money is involved, you cannot take decisions which are short-term. So decisions are very long-term decisions. So if deciding, look at Hilton, if it decides to open a hotel, a 400-room hotel in a particular location, because it feels that this destination is going to be a tourist destination or an upcoming tourist destination, they plan for 15, 20 years because they have to break even. So when you look at that, the strategic document which they try to produce, which kind of then, lists down all these things in finer details, is something called the strategy document. And this strategy document relates the vision, the objective, the mission of the company into smaller objectives, which are goals and objectives which people will be assigned or they will be taking up, from a point of view of understanding, and they will become job descriptions for people. Okay. So this particular aspect then looks at, the last bit to understand how goals and objectives are put in place, how does the hierarchy of goals and objectives are decided. So which ones will be corporate objectives, which will be functional, which will be operational. That means corporate would be somebody who becomes the general manager of that hotel, will look at the overall marketability of the product, reputation and other bits. So that will be his measure of, objectives. But when you look at people working within various departments, like people who's the laundry and service manager, the front desk manager, the reservations manager, they will look at functional strategy. They will run the departments efficiently and productively to, overall achieve that objective of building reputation or, gaining customers. And then there will be operational objectives, which means people who work on a day in, day out basis in that role. Somebody who works in the front desk, works in the reception, they execute these responsibilities basis the job description which are given, and that tend to bring in customers. So the breaking of objectives is then taken forward, and this then leads to a broader understanding of, how strategic management, or as a, this as a field works within competitive advantage. Key that can be done is like how do they differentiate themselves? Do they look at differentiation? Do they look at differentiation and leadership? Do they look at differentiation and cost leadership? And these are, strategic models that we have to look at, like the BCG matrix, the ANSOB matrix, to try and arrive at a position which will allow them to be dominant in that market. Is that okay? So this bit is basically to study the background on strategic management and strategic marketing. Is that okay?
Yes.
Any questions on this?
No question.
So this is more of theoretical background and study that you need to know, so that you are able to, kind of build this into task 2.1, and you have a bit of an understanding in terms of models. Okay. Then we will look at broadly, just very broadly today, the learning outcome 3, which talks about, the role of technology. What is the role of technology? What is the contribution it is making in the tourism and hospitality sector in general? And when we look at understanding this, we need to understand 2-3 key things. Now, how is technology in this particular sector? That is the first thing that we need to understand, what kind of an impact, advancements in technology is having on this particular sector. The second thing that we need to know is, okay, we know that technology is, kind of having an impact on every sector, whether it's medicine, consumer, fast-moving goods, hotel industry, travel industry, whatever it is. Now, once we know, how do we then understand that what are the issues this advancements create, within this sector, and where is it leading to in the future? And then, to a certain extent, we will look at very briefly, the importance of security, because this industry actually generates and also stores a lot of personal data about, consumers. Okay? A lot of personal data is actually stored about consumers. Things like when you book a hotel, you might have your credit card information, your preferences, your age group, and things like that. And that would mean that this particular sector has a lot of data which it captures. And that data, when it captures, needs to be made, secure as far as, and kept secure, so that this cannot be misutilized by people who work within this sector. Is that okay?
Yep.
So let's look at a few slides on this side. Now, what I'm going to do is, for today, after we finish these slides, I'm going to send you 3 broad, handouts, which will basically cover, the slides that I've shown you in a bit more detail. And this will basically mean that you will understand by reading these articles or, handouts, that what is the intent of, studying them from a point of view of tourism and, hospitality sector. Okay?
Yep.
Now, let's look at very briefly. Now, why do you think, technology is having an impact? So part of this I covered earlier was to look at, that with the advent of internet, modernization has happened within every sector. So travel and tourism is no exception, and most of the industries within the sector, THM as we call them, tourism, management and hospitality, have also benefited from the advent of technology. Now, in general, when we look at, what kind of things have actually impacted, one I alluded to earlier was the availability of something called a central reservation system, or a management information system, which allowed, management and booking of rooms, to happen quite easily. So in general, if I have to enlarge that and talk about that concept, what that would mean is that the MIS or certain systems which allowed MIS, Management Information Systems, to be implemented within this sector allowed the sector to become much more organized and much more balanced. Now, when I say organized, that meant that because data was being stored electronically, the retrieval of data became quicker and faster. And once the retrieval of data became quicker and faster, it could lead to a lot of data mining, which allowed consumer preferences to be read, and that allowed the organization to tailor services. So the applicability of management information systems, and this is something that you can relate to very clearly because you work within the IT side. What do you think are the key advantages IT has brought across in the industry?
I think because right now we have so many platforms that we can gather all the data, especially if we are focusing on customers' preferences, right? So because of technology, right now we have all the platforms online where we can get all this data. So it is easier for us to tailor, as you have mentioned, the kind of service that we want to provide to them. So if we know all their preferences, and then we can, as much as possible, exceed their expectations when they will get our service or product.
Right. So broadly, in the advent of technology or implementation of technology within the sector has actually helped three broad areas. One area is operational areas. The second area is guest services, and third is the management of information itself, because you store a lot of data, so you need systems to be able to recollect, recall, modify, and market that data to be able to get more customers. So essentially, three broad areas that we look at. So operational efficiency means that large hotels, which basically employed the central booking reservation system, which had multiple things. That means the inventory of rooms could be available all across in any chain of hotel across any city or any country, and they could look at that availability pretty much at an instant. The other is that we see that some of these technologies which have come in have allowed quality services to be offered. So things like preferences you were mentioning. Now, when you check into a hotel now, and sometimes you see the advent of personal assistants, if you've stayed in that hotel earlier or you booked a particular type of room earlier, that information is available to the booking staff, and when you are calling them or speaking to them, that information gives them access to be able to tailor some of the services to you. If you travel quite a lot, you assume some of the other things that we see with the televisions being installed in most rooms and the interactive video system, the what you call movies on demand system, or the satellite television at the hotel, very integral part of most good hotels, because if you stay, you get some channels, but you have a flat TV, and some of them earlier had the big CRT based TVs, but now it's predominantly flat TVs. So as the technology is increasing, there's a lot of expenditure which is also increasing, because a lot of hotels went through an upgrade of television sets. If you imagine everybody implementing a LCD TV set, and a lot of hotels went and wanted to do deals with a lot of manufacturers to see, okay, if I look at 32-inch or 37-inch or the 40-inch television, and we need 5,000 of these or 50,000 of these, that meant that, there were a lot of cost in terms of upgrades for implementing this technology as well.
Yes, correct.
But let's look at the bright side. So some of the other sides that we look at in terms of, how it has benefited is that the marketing and distribution of these services has become global, right? So online, the advent of online travel agencies, the websites which are able to sell, rooms like booking.com. Here in the UK, obviously, we have Booking, Trivago, sites like Expedia, Thomas Cook. They have become now integrated channels where they not just sell one service, which is just the, the hotels, the bookings, but they also sell you travel services, airport and pickup drops. They sell you rooms. They also sell you leisure holidays. That means additional things that you do on your holiday when you are going. So they are able to offer this as an integrated package, and that has become, one of the signature feature of, what technology is kind of provided in this sector. Now, beyond this, what I'm going to do is, I haven't prepared any slides, but I would want you to go through this particular handout, which talks about what impact technology has had in tourism. And this
Mm-hmm.
particular thing talks about the advantages and disadvantages, covering task, of learning outcome 3 in much more detail, right?
Okay.
And there's another handout that I have, which basically talks about, the application of technology within this sector. So this talks
Mm-hmm.
about, with an example of, Jamaica or the Barbados or the, Caribbean in general, as a destination, and what are the advantages which this has meant in terms of tourism being, technology being available to tourism operators in that area, vis-a-vis
Mm-hmm.
direct advantages which the technology and the advent of technology is created within this sector. Now here, I've also looked at putting in some example of Hilton group of hotels in particular, and then use one or two models or frameworks. So one is the Porter's 5 forces model, and the other is the value chain analysis model, to explain how, the process of technology implementation happens. But how does a company like Hilton look at that this is something that we need to buy and then get into the business, because this is giving us a competitive advantage, or this is something which our competitors are offering and we need to offer as well. So
Mm-hmm.
we look at, through this model, how Hilton did an analysis to look at the environment, and why the things are required, what consumers are asking for. And once they looked at that, they identified that we need to implement these, systems, things like the RFIDs, the systems like, which allow, the interlinkages of services to happen. When you book a airline ticket, you are able to offer, hotels and, other services within that destination. And then when they decided to go for it, because the demand was there, then they looked at implementing this within the organization, and why they looked at implementing, and before they implemented, which product they chose and why they chose that product, is analyzed through the Porter's 5 services, 5 forces model. And that model helps them analyze at who are the new entrants which are coming in, like budget hotels, which are going to be hitting them. Some of the suppliers that they need to work with, without which these services cannot be provided. What are the other substitutes which are available in the market if they implement this? What are the other features which would come in the next few years, or few months, which will kind of sit and be competition to them? And last but not the least, how will these implementation of new features help them get advantage against their competitors? So this
Mm-hmm.
is then put across to the Porter's 5 forces model, and this is another handout which I'm going to send you for you to look at. I'm going to put this on Moodle, but also email that to you for you to be able
Okay.
to study. So what
Yeah,
we're going to
sure.
do is stop here for today, in which I think we have looked at briefly. Learning outcome 3 is quite simple to understand. I think you are within this field, you would know quite better. And the bit
Yeah.
which we talked about, the security and ethics, is because a lot of personal data is being collected, so the saving and securing this data to be stored in servers, so that there are appropriate people who have, let's say, have authorization to accept, um, authorization to not accept, authorization to, have access to that data is required. And that is where, some of these systems are being put in place. So when you lose a card, for example, when you check into a hotel, if you're going with a family, then you are normally given 2 cards to check into your hotel. And those are things, if you end up losing the card, you have to inform the reception, because that, if it leads to theft or if it leads to an incident, then the hotel is not responsible, because these are guidelines which they've created before you sign the dotted line that, okay, this is what it is. So
Mm-hmm.
it is the responsibility of both the consumer who's taking these services, and also the responsibility of hotels which are basically providing these services, to work in tandem. And that is where some of these security and ethics come into place when they are implementing technology, and or consumers availing this technology.
Mm-hmm.
So any questions on this so far?
So far, everything is clear. Yeah, so you just have to send me all the documents so that I
Yeah,
can have a look as well.
that's fine. So I'll send these documents to you, and then what we will do is we will catch up on Thursday. oblique Sunday, and then basically look at discussing the learning outcome 4 to basically try and complete this particular unit.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, no worries, Mark.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining the session today.